My name is Chloe Vance, and I'm 34 years old. 12 years ago, my sister told my parents a lie about my life in medical school. That single calculated lie cost me my entire family. They cut me off. They blocked my number. They skipped my residency graduation. They weren't at my wedding. For 6 agonizing years, I was no one's daughter. Then last week, my sister was rushed into the emergency room, bleeding unconscious, dying. The trauma team paged the chief of surgery. The doors opened, and when my mother saw the name on the white coat walking toward her daughter's stretcher, she grabbed my father's arms so hard it left bruises. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now. Maybe you are winding down on a quiet Wednesday evening in a bustling city like Sialkot, or maybe you are waking up in the freezing cold somewhere else. Wherever you are, whatever your local time is, stay close. Now let me take you back to the spring of 2014, to a kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio, and the last time my father ever looked at me with pride. The kitchen was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the sharp tear of thick paper as my father ripped open the heavy envelope. My hands were trembling beneath the table. I pressed them hard against my jeans to stop the shaking. At 22 years old, finishing my pre-med degree, I was used to being the ghost of the Vance house. Growing up, there were 2 daughters, but only my older sister Jessica truly mattered. Jessica was a performer. She charmed every adult, commanded every room, and delivered the perfect obedience my parents, Thomas and Barbara, demanded. I was the invisible one. While Jessica held court at Thanksgiving dinners, making everyone laugh, I was buried in heavy textbooks. I spent my youth memorizing complex molecular bonds instead of seeking attention, desperately trying to earn just a fraction of the love they gave her. I vividly remember coming home as a high school senior with a 3rd-place ribbon from the state science fair. It was a massive achievement. I was the only kid from our district to make it. But that same weekend, Jessica had a local community theater play. My parents went to the play. When I finally showed my dad my state ribbon, he barely glanced up from his newspaper. "That's nice, Chloe," he muttered. He didn't ask a single question. I told myself it didn't hurt. I told myself I would just become the daughter they couldn't ignore. But right now, in the spring of 2014, my father was staring at the letter in his hands. His thick eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "University of Washington," he said slowly. He tasted the words, letting them roll around his mouth as if he couldn't believe they were real. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. For the first time in my entire life, he was really seeing me. "That's a real top-tier medical school. Maybe you'll make something of yourself after all, Chloe." It wasn't a warm compliment. It was heavy and loaded with doubt. But to a starving person, even crumbs feel like a feast. My chest tightened. I sucked in a sharp breath, holding onto those words like oxygen. "Oh my goodness," my mother gasped, dropping her dish towel on the counter. She rushed to the phone, her fingers dialing wildly. Within minutes, she was calling Aunt Martha, her sister, and 2 of our neighbors. "Chloe got into medical school. Can you believe it?" Her voice had a high musical pitch to it. It was genuine, undiluted pride. And for the first time it was directed entirely at me. I smiled, a real wide smile that made my cheeks ache. But then I glanced across the table. Jessica was sitting perfectly still. She was 26, working a fine, steady job as a marketing coordinator. Fine was Jessica's absolute limit, even though she would rather die than admit it. She was smiling at me, but the smile was stiff. It stopped right at her mouth. Her eyes were doing something completely different. They were darting back and forth, cold and calculating. She was measuring the room, watching my mother pacing with the phone, realizing the spotlight was finally shifting away from her. I didn't know it then. I just thought she was tired from her drive. "Wow, Chloe," Jessica said, her voice dripping with sugary sweetness. "Washington, that's so far away. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure?" "I am," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "I've worked so hard for this." Over the next week, the trap slowly snapped shut. Jessica started calling me more than she ever had in her entire life. 2 or 3 times a week my phone would buzz with her name. "How's the packing going, Chloe?" she would ask smoothly, her tone wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "Have you found a nice apartment? What are your new professors like?" I was so foolish. I was so desperate for a sister, for that normal family connection I had watched other girls have, that I fell for it completely. I gave her every single detail. I told her the names of my classmates, my exact schedule, my fears and my deepest vulnerabilities. I handed her all the ammunition she would ever need, wrapping it up with a grateful, trusting smile. I thought my getting into medical school had finally unlocked her respect. I had no idea I was happily handing her the shovel to dig my grave. Second year of medical school hit like a freight train. I was 24, living in a cramped Seattle apartment where the heater barely worked, and the cold rain never stopped beating against the thin glass windows. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Cranial nerve 7. Go. A heavy, worn textbook slapped onto the cheap kitchen table. Emily Hayes stood across from me, her dark, messy hair tied up in a frantic bun. She was my roommate, my best friend, and the only reason I survived my first year. Emily didn't have a safety net. She had grown up bouncing between group foster homes in Spokane. No parents to call on Sundays. No care packages in the mail. Just a fierce, brilliant mind and a stubborn refusal to fail. I rubbed my burning eyes. Facial nerve. Motor control for facial expressions. Good. Keep going, she demanded, pacing the scuffed linoleum floor. Emily was my chosen family. The contrast between her loyalty and my real family's distance was a sharp, constant ache inside my chest. Just 2 days earlier, during a brutal week of neuroanatomy exams, I had cracked. My hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too much fear. I called home, just wanting my mother's voice, just wanting someone to tell me I was going to be okay. Mom picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was rushed, distracted. Chloe, I can't talk right now. Mom, I have a massive exam tomorrow, and Jessica is having a very rough day at work. Mom cut in, her tone tight with worry over my sister's marketing job. Her boss was unfair to her. I need to keep the line open in case she calls back. Call again this weekend. Click. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. I sat on our apartment floor, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. The old familiar feeling of being totally invisible washed over me. The room felt freezing. Then a chipped mug of terrible bitter coffee slid into my hands. Emily dropped onto the floor beside me. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just looked at my phone, then at me. Their loss, Emily said, her voice hard and steady. Now get up. We have 5 more chapters to memorize, and I am not letting you fail. She was my anchor, but in September of our 2nd year, the anchor snapped. We were in the middle of a study session when her phone rang. It was her doctor. Emily had been rubbing her lower back for weeks, swallowing over-the-counter painkillers, blaming the ache on the awful library chairs. She answered the phone with a tired joke on her lips. But as she listened, I watched the life completely drain out of her face. Her skin turned the color of old paper. The phone trembled in her hand. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The air in the apartment vanished. The rain outside seemed to stop making a sound. There was no family to call, no parents to fly in and take over. There was only me. The very next morning, I walked straight into the Dean of Student Affairs' office. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my voice was pure ice. The office smelled like lemon polish and old paper. I need a formal leave of absence, I told the dean, planting my hands firmly on his heavy oak desk. I didn't beg. I laid out the medical paperwork. 1 semester. Designated caregiver status. The dean looked at me, his eyes softening with pity. He didn't argue. He stamped the papers, held my spot in the program securely, and filed it all with the university registrar. It was legitimate. It was documented. I would return in February. I practically moved into Emily's hospital room that same afternoon. The oncology ward was a bleak, terrifying place. It smelled of bleach and sickness. The fluorescent lights hummed with a cold, uncaring energy. I slept in a stiff plastic chair by her bed. I drove her to chemotherapy. I held her thin, sweating hand at 2 in the morning when the pain shot through her back so violently she couldn't breathe. In the dark of that hospital room, listening to the steady, cruel beep of her heart monitor, I made the worst mistake of my life. I pulled out my phone. I needed someone to talk to. I needed a sister. I dialed Jessica's number. The screen glowed in the dark hospital room. It was 2:15 a.m. Emily was finally asleep, her chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. I listened to the steady, rhythmic beep of the IV monitor. It was the only thing keeping the crushing silence of the oncology ward away. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my back aching, feeling completely hollow. I don't know why my fingers found Jessica's name in my contacts. Maybe my exhausted brain just wanted to believe the warm illusion she had painted back in May. I needed family. I needed someone to hold me up. I hit dial. It rang 3 times. Chloe. Jessica's voice came through, thick with sleep but instantly alert. Is everything okay? It's late. I broke down. I pressed my forehead against the cold cinder block wall and told her everything. My voice cracked as I whispered about Emily's biopsy, the stage 3 diagnosis, the formal leave of absence. I'm coming back in the spring, I promised, sniffing back tears, sounding like a frightened child instead of a medical student. She has no one else, Jess. I'm her designated caregiver. A long pause hung on the line. I heard the faint rustle of bedsheets. Oh my God, Chloe, Jessica murmured. Her voice was thick and sweet like syrup. Too sweet. I am so sorry. That is just so brave of you. To put your life on hold for a friend. Do you think Mom and Dad will be mad? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. No, Jessica said smoothly. A little too smoothly. Listen to me. Take all the time you need. I won't say a word to Mom and Dad. You know how they are. They wouldn't understand. They would just worry and stress you out. Let this be our secret. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a wave of immense relief wash over my tired body. Thank you, Jess. Really. Of course, sweetie. I'm your big sister. I've got your back. She hung up. I stared at the dark screen, feeling a tiny spark of warmth in my freezing chest. I actually believed her. 4 days later, that spark burned my entire life to the ground. It was exactly 10 p.m. on a Thursday. Emily had suffered a severe reaction to the latest round of chemotherapy. Her fever had spiked dangerously high, and her body was shaking with violent chills. The nurses had admitted her overnight, and I was sitting right beside her, watching the poison drip into her veins. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against the metal tray table. The screen lit up the dim room. Dad. My stomach dropped. He never called me. Never. My medical training kicked in, a sudden rush of adrenaline flooding my system. Why is he calling? Did Jessica tell them? Is someone hurt? I swiped to answer and stepped out into the quiet, sterile hallway, leaning against the chilly wall. Dad? Is everything okay? Your sister told us everything. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, arctic. It was the voice of a judge reading a final sentence. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. Dad. What? What did she tell you? The dropping out, he said, the words biting through the speaker like frost. The older boyfriend with the trust fund. Your new life. The hallway seemed to tilt. I pressed my hand flat against the cinder block to keep myself upright. My brain, trained to process complex data and chemical reactions in seconds, completely stalled. Boyfriend? Trust fund? Dad, wait. What boyfriend? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Chloe. A heavy, suffocating silence hung on the line. I could hear his shallow breathing. Jessica showed us the messages. She showed us the Facebook posts. Dad, listen to me. Panic clawed at my throat. I am sitting outside an oncology ward right now. I'm taking care of my friend Emily. She is dying of pancreatic cancer. Jessica knows this. She told me she wouldn't. Jessica said you'd say exactly that. The words struck me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. She warned us. My father continued, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. She said you'd have a tragic sob story ready to cover your tracks. She told us how embarrassed you are of us now, that your rich new fiancé doesn't want you associating with your middle-class, uneducated family. No, I cried out, not caring if the nurses heard me. That's a lie. It's an absolute lie. There was a shuffle on the line. The phone was passed. How could you say those things about us, Chloe? It was my mother. Her voice was shaking, violently vibrating with wounded pride and deep betrayal. After everything we did to raise you, to tell your own sister that you wish we weren't your parents. Mom, please, use logic for 1 second, I begged, my analytical mind scrambling for hard evidence, for proof to stop the bleeding. I filed a medical leave of absence. I have the university paperwork in my bag. I can give you the dean's direct office number right now. Call him. Just call him. Enough. Dad took the phone back. The coldness had turned to stone. We are not going to be humiliated by you anymore. Don't call this house until you are ready to apologize and show some respect. You have embarrassed this family enough. Dad, please don't. Click. The line went dead. I slid slowly down the cinder block wall until I hit the cold floor. I sat there in the glaring fluorescent light. Through the crack in the door, Emily's IV monitor beeped in a steady, cruel rhythm. I stared at my phone screen. Call duration 5 minutes and 18 seconds. That was it. 5 minutes and 18 seconds. That was exactly how long it took for my parents to erase 24 years of my existence. They didn't ask questions. They didn't ask for proof. They just believed the daughter they always preferred. 30 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my lap. A single text message glowed in the dark. Jessica, I'm sorry, Chloe. They kept asking why you weren't answering their calls during your classes. I had to tell them the truth about your new life. Have a good life in Seattle. I stared at the words. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't covering for me. My clinical mind dissected the text, stripping away the fake emotion to see the cold, hard bones underneath. This was a surgical strike. She had set the trap, waited 4 days for the perfect moment, and executed it without leaving a single fingerprint. She had secured her spot as the only loyal, loving child. I looked down at my hands. I was 24 years old. I was 2,000 miles away from Columbus. I had exactly $58 in my checking account. My best friend was dying in the next room, and I had just become no one's daughter. I tried. I need you to know that. I didn't just walk away. In medical school, they teach you what to do when a patient's heart stops. You call a code blue. You pump their chest. You push medicine into their veins. You use the defibrillator to shock them. You fight until there is absolutely no hope left. That is exactly how I treated my family. I treated them like a dying patient I was desperately trying to save. Over the next 6 days, I called my parents 12 times. The first 4 calls went to voicemail. I sat on the edge of my unmade bed, listening to my father's recorded voice. "You've reached Thomas Vance. Leave a message." And it felt like a ghost was speaking to me. On the 5th try, the phone didn't ring. It just made a sharp, dead click. My number was blocked on Dad's phone. Mom blocked me 3 days later. Panic set in, cold and sharp. I moved to my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing 3 detailed, desperate emails. I attached the official PDF of my university leave of absence. I attached Emily's medical confirmation. I even typed out the dean's direct office number in bold letters. I hit send. I waited, watching my inbox refresh over and over. Nothing. Finally, I wrote a handwritten letter. I poured my entire heart out onto 3 pages of notebook paper. I explained the truth about Jessica. I begged them to just look at the evidence. I walked through the freezing Seattle rain to the post office and mailed it priority. 6 days later, I opened my rusted metal mailbox. The envelope was sitting right there. Stamped across the front in thick red ink were 3 words: "Return to sender, unopened." I stared at it. The rain dripped from my hair onto the paper. I recognized the neat looping cursive of my mother's handwriting on the front. She hadn't even torn the flap. She had looked at my name, held my heart in her hands, and handed it right back to the mail carrier. I had one option left: Aunt Martha. Martha was my dad's younger sister. She was the only person in our family who had ever looked at me like I mattered. I called her from the hospital cafeteria, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. I told her everything. "Oh, Chloe," Martha whispered. Her voice sounded thin and scared. "Let me try. Let me call your father tonight." I sat by Emily's bed and waited. 50 agonizing minutes later, my phone vibrated. I stepped into the quiet hallway. "Aunt Martha?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did he listen? Did you tell him about the paperwork?" A heavy, wet sniffle came through the speaker. Martha was crying. "He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart," she said, her voice heavy with total defeat. "He was so cold, Chloe. He said Jessica showed them proof that you were mocking them behind their backs." I tried to tell him about Emily, but he yelled at me. "Martha, please." "He said if I brought your name up again, he would cut me off too," she sobbed. "He said you were dead to him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I slowly lowered the phone. Every single attempt to save them had been rejected, blocked, or returned unopened. And as I stood there in the glaring hospital lights, the truth finally hit me. A terrible, dark realization settled into my bones. This wasn't new. This wasn't just about Jessica's brilliant lie. This was the pattern of my entire life, finally reaching its natural end. They had skipped my science fairs. They had ignored my grades. They had always taken Jessica's word over mine without a second thought. This was just the final, loudest version of it. Jessica had simply handed them the perfect excuse to stop pretending they loved me. The code blue was over. I stopped calling. 2 months later, Emily died. It happened on a freezing Sunday morning in late November. The world outside the hospice window was entirely gray. The pale winter light barely reached the foot of her bed. It was so quiet. There was no dramatic movie ending. Just the slow, fading beep, beep of the heart monitor getting further and further apart. I sat in the chair, holding her thin, cold hand. I watched her chest rise one last time. It didn't fall back down. The monitor went flat. A long, steady tone filled the room. I was the only one holding her hand. No one from my family even knew she existed. The one person I had trusted, my own sister, was 2,000 miles away, probably eating Sunday brunch with my parents, completely ignoring the fact that the reason for my medical leave had just stopped breathing. 3 days later, I organized a small memorial at a local chapel. It was a beautiful building that could easily hold 75 people. 8 people came. Emily's former foster sister drove up from Spokane. A couple of my medical school classmates showed up in dark coats. One of the night nurses from the oncology ward came, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I stood at the wooden podium at the front of the chapel. I looked out at the rows and rows of empty pews. The silence in the room was deafening. I read the eulogy I had written for my best friend. My voice echoed off the high ceiling, steady and clear. I didn't shed a single tear. Not because my heart wasn't completely shattered into a million pieces, but because I had been crying for 4 months straight in the dark, and my well of tears was completely permanently dry. That night I sat alone in Emily's apartment. The silence was heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I walked into the dim kitchen. Her favorite yellow mug was still sitting in the sink, a dried ring of tea at the bottom. Her heavy winter coat still hung on the hook by the front door, still holding the faint shape of her shoulders. I touched the cold, rough fabric, my throat tightening until it physically hurt. I opened my laptop on the small kitchen table. The screen glowed in the dark. I pulled up the university website. The re-enrollment form for the spring semester was completely blank. The little black cursor blinked at me. It felt like a ticking clock taunting my frozen state. Why go back? I thought, staring at the empty boxes. Who am I even doing this for anymore? My family is gone. Emily is gone. I am entirely alone. I reached for a heavy textbook to prop up my laptop. It was Gray's Anatomy, Emily's heavily highlighted copy. As I lifted the thick book, a small square of yellow paper fluttered out and drifted to the scuffed floor. I picked it up. My breath caught sharply in my throat. It was a sticky note bookmarked right at the chapter on the pancreas. The handwriting was shaky, decimated by the heavy morphine she had been on. But the letters were deliberate. She had fiercely pressed the pen into the paper. Finish what you started, Chloe. Become the doctor I know you are. And don't you dare let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are. She had written it weeks before she died. She knew she wouldn't be here to push me when I finally broke, so she left a piece of her strength behind. I stared at the note until the yellow paper blurred through my tears. The apartment hummed quietly around me. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I opened the laptop again. I placed my hands on the keyboard. There were only 2 options left in my life: crumble into dust or climb out of the dark. I chose to climb. I filled out the re-enrollment form. Not for my parents. Not for revenge. I did it for Emily, and for the powerful version of me she believed in. I went back to medical school in February. It was a brutal, freezing winter. I had no family support, no emotional safety net. If I fell, there was absolutely no one to catch me. I picked up the maximum amount of student loans. I took a grueling part-time job as a research assistant just to pay my rent. I ate leftover, stale hospital cafeteria food more times than I will ever admit. Medical school does not care if your heart is broken. The pharmacology exams do not pause just because your family erased you. During my 3rd year, the pressure finally caught up to me. I had a massive panic attack. It was 1 a.m. during a 14-hour surgical rotation. The exhaustion, the stress, and the absolute loneliness finally crushed my chest. I rushed into a sterile supply closet and locked the door. The walls felt like they were shrinking. My heart hammered wildly as I slid down the cold tile wall, clutching my knees in the dark. I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. But then I pictured that yellow sticky note. I imagined Emily standing over me, handing me a bad cup of coffee. I forced myself to stand up. I smoothed down my blue scrubs, wiped my face with a paper towel, and walked back out onto the brightly lit hospital floor. I stopped panicking. I started working like my life depended on it, because it did. I graduated on time when I was 26. No one from Columbus came to cheer for me. I didn't even look at the empty seats in the back of the auditorium. I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency at Valley View General Hospital back in the Midwest. It was a massive Level 1 trauma center, one of the busiest in Ohio. That is where I met Dr. Evelyn Cross. Evie was 60 years old, the chief of surgery emeritus. She was built like a steel cable wrapped in a sterile gown. During my first week, I hesitated for 2 seconds while clamping a bleeding artery. Evie's eyes locked onto me above her surgical mask. "Dr. Vance," she barked, her voice cutting through the loud beeping alarms. "Are you going to stare at the blood, or are you going to save this man's life?" After the surgery, she cornered me in the scrub room. I braced myself to be yelled at. Instead, she pointed a dripping soapy finger at my chest. "You have the hands of a master surgeon, Vance. But your head is full of ghosts. Evict them. Focus on the living." Over the next few years, she demanded absolute perfection, accepted 0 excuses, and somehow became the fierce mentor I desperately needed, and the mother figure I had lost. During my 3rd year of residency at 29, I met Lucas Pierce. He was a civil rights attorney doing free legal work at a clinic near the hospital. He had calm, dark eyes, a razor-sharp mind, and a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. One rainy evening at a quiet coffee shop, I finally told him the whole story. The lies, the blocked calls, the returned letters. I waited for the pity. I waited for him to offer toxic positivity, to tell me they're your family, you should try to reach out again. Lucas didn't flinch. He just sat there, listening intently. He slowly set his coffee mug down, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You deserve better, Chloe. Let them live in their fiction. You live in reality." We got married 2 years later. It was a beautiful Sunday evening in Evie's sprawling green backyard. There were exactly 45 guests. Lucas's father, a retired judge with a loud booming laugh, walked me down the aisle. I had sent one single wedding invitation to Columbus. I knew I shouldn't have, but that tiny hopeful child inside me had to try one last time. It came back exactly the way my desperate letter had 6 years prior. Return to sender. Aunt Martha was there though. She sat in the very front row, clutching a lace handkerchief, and cried enough happy tears for 2 parents. After the ceremony, Evie pulled me aside. She handed me a thick sealed envelope. "A nomination," she said, her eyes gleaming with fierce pride, "for Chief of Trauma Surgery. Don't open it yet. You're not quite ready, but you will be." I tucked it into my bag, feeling the heavy weight of my new life. Years passed. I turned 34. I became someone my family wouldn't even recognize. It is a good life. It is a real life, built brick by heavy brick with my own 2 hands. I have a beautiful house in the suburbs with a wide porch that gets warm morning light. I have a husband who is my rock. I have a golden retriever named Galen, who never judges me when I eat dry cereal in the kitchen at midnight after a brutal 12-hour shift. But there is a very specific kind of ache that never fully fades away. It lives deep in the hollow space between your ribs, right where a family is supposed to be. I don't wake up crying anymore. I don't check my phone hoping to see a Columbus area code. But every single Thanksgiving there is a microscopic moment where I am setting the dining table. I count the plates. I look at the empty chairs, and I feel the absence of my parents like a phantom limb, an invisible wound that still throbs when it rains. Aunt Martha still called me every Sunday at exactly 4 p.m. It was a quiet ritual. She was my only remaining thread to a world I used to live in. I never directly asked about my parents, but I listened closely to her small updates. Mom and Dad were healthy. Dad had retired. Jessica had gotten a divorce 3 years ago and was now selling medical devices. When Martha told me that, I almost laughed. The irony was poetic. My sister, the woman who had used my medical career to destroy my life, was now making her living off the edges of the medical field. But last week the Sunday ritual broke. I was standing in my kitchen, wiping down the marble counters. Galen, my golden retriever, was sleeping near the warm oven. Lucas was sitting at the island, quietly highlighting a stack of legal briefs. The house was perfectly still. Then my phone buzzed. "Hi, Aunt Martha," I said, putting the phone on speaker. I stopped wiping the counter. My medical training kicked in instantly. You learn to diagnose a patient within the first 5 seconds of hearing their voice. Martha's breathing was shallow. Her vocal cords were tight. Her heart rate was elevated. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated fear. "Martha, what is it?" I asked, turning the speaker off and pressing the phone hard against my ear. "Are you sick? Is it Dad?" No, they're physically fine," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Chloe, there is something I need to tell you about Jessica. Something deeply concerning she has been telling the family. I've been trying to piece it together for years, but, Chloe, she didn't just lie that one time in medical school. It's so much worse." Before I could ask what she meant, a loud, sharp alarm pierced the quiet kitchen. Beep, beep, beep. It was my hospital pager, sitting on the counter. The screen flashed bright red. Code red: trauma activation. Level 1. ETA 10 mins. "Martha, I have to go," I said, my heart instantly shifting gears from family dread to professional focus. "It's a massive trauma coming in. I will call you right back." I never got the chance to call her back, because the very thing Martha was desperately trying to warn me about was, at that exact second, hurtling down Interstate 71 at 70 miles per hour in a silver sedan. The driver was about to run a red light. And within the hour my sister would be lying on my operating table bleeding to death, with my parents sobbing in the waiting room, and my name printed on the surgical chart. But to understand the pure horror of that moment, I have to tell you what Martha had discovered. Jessica's lie wasn't just a single trap set in 2014. As a doctor, I know how diseases work. Some viruses strike quickly and fade. Others are like a slow-growing cancer. They hide in the dark, silently wrapping around healthy tissue, feeding on the host until there is nothing left. Jessica's lie was a cancer. It was a highly calculated, decade-long campaign of total disinformation. Over the years, Jessica had carefully maintained her false narrative. At every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas morning, she performed the role of the tragic, protective older sister. She pretended to shield my parents from their awful, ungrateful youngest child. "We don't really talk about Chloe," Jessica would whisper to my cousins, looking down at her hands sadly. "She made it clear she thinks our family is beneath her now. It just breaks Mom and Dad's hearts. Please don't bring her up to them." But Jessica had a massive problem. She needed to make absolutely sure my parents never ever tried to look me up. If my father had simply typed my name into a Google search bar, the entire illusion would have instantly shattered. He would have seen my residency match records. He would have seen my published surgical papers. He would have seen my shining profile on the Valley View Hospital website. So she tailored the lie with terrifying precision. She told my parents that I had legally changed my last name to my wealthy husband's name, specifically to hide from them. She told Uncle Arthur's wife that she had bravely reached out to me, and that I had coldly threatened to file a police restraining order if anyone in the family ever contacted me again. The absolute genius of it, and I use the word genius with complete disgust, was that Jessica didn't need my parents to forget me. She needed them to feel so intensely rejected, so deeply humiliated by my supposed arrogance, that their own stubborn pride would stop them from ever looking for me. She weaponized their egos. Their grief slowly morphed into a hard, bitter anger. Their silence became justified self-preservation. And she remained exactly what she had always craved to be, the sun in their solar system. The only loyal daughter left. And she wasn't just lying. She was hunting. 8 months ago, Lucas had sat me down in this exact kitchen. He had poured me a cup of coffee, set his mug down very carefully, and looked at me with a dark, serious expression. "Chloe," he had said, his voice low. "3 years ago, someone using a fake name contacted the Human Resources Department at your old residency hospital. They asked a lot of questions about your employment status. They were fishing to see if you had ever been disciplined by the medical board, if your credentials were faked, or if you had ever been sued for a surgical malpractice." A cold chill had washed over my arms. "Who?" My colleague traced the digital inquiry, Lucas said, his jaw tightening with protective anger. The IP address came back to a medical device sales office right in the middle of Columbus. Jessica's office. She was terrified. She knew she was living in a house of cards, terrified that one day I would surface and ruin her perfect narrative. So she was desperately digging through my past, looking for dirt to keep in her back pocket just in case she needed to destroy me all over again. She found absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to find. I was spotless. When Lucas told me that, the realization that my own sister had spent years building an entire architecture of deception was terrifying. I could have hired a lawyer right then. I could have sued her for defamation. I could have driven to Columbus and confronted my parents with the files. But I didn't. I chose peace. I chose to let them live in their dark little world while I saved lives in the light. I didn't need to force the truth out, because life, in its strange, brutal way, was about to blow the entire thing wide open, and it was going to happen in the most public, bloody, and ironic way imaginable. Friday night, 4:15 a.m. The pager ripped me out of a dead sleep. It didn't buzz. It shrieked, a high-pitched wail that meant someone was dying fast. Lucas shifted slightly beside me in the dark, murmuring something soft before pulling the quilt higher. Galen lifted his golden head from his dog bed, his tail giving one sleepy thump against the floorboards. I was already moving. I grabbed the pager from the nightstand, its harsh blue light illuminating the dark bedroom. Level 1 trauma, MVC, single female, 38, blunt abdominal trauma, hemodynamically unstable. ETA 10 mins. My brain instantly booted up into surgical mode, analyzing the cold data. Motor vehicle collision. Hemodynamically unstable meant her blood pressure was crashing, her heart struggling to pump whatever blood she had left. Blunt abdominal trauma at that speed usually meant a ruptured spleen or a lacerated liver. She was bleeding to death from the inside out. I threw off the covers. I was dressed in scrubs and sneakers in 3 minutes. I was out the door and driving my car through the pitch-black, rain-slicked Ohio streets in 6. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. The city was completely silent, asleep, oblivious to the violence about to crash into my emergency room. I badged in through the ambulance bay doors. The familiar smell of antiseptic and old coffee hit my nose. I walked straight down the glaring fluorescent hallway toward Trauma Bay 3, my stride long and purposeful. The chaos of the ER was a low, steady hum around me. My trauma team was already assembling with practiced efficiency. 2 senior surgical residents were pulling on sterile gloves. A trauma nurse was prepping IV lines. The anesthesiologist was running checks on the intubation cart. I stepped up to the central desk, picked up the electronic intake tablet, and swiped to the incoming patient's preliminary chart sent by the paramedics in the field. Patient, Jessica Vance. DOB, April 18, 19. Emergency contact, Thomas Vance, father. I stopped walking. My sneakers froze on the linoleum floor. The loud, chaotic noise of the hallway, the beeping cardiac monitors, the sharp voice over the intercom, the squeak of rubber soles, it all suddenly pulled back. It was like a receding ocean tide before a tsunami hits. The sound simply vanished from my ears. For 3 terrifying seconds, I wasn't Dr. Chloe Vance, chief of surgery. I was 24 years old again. I was sitting on a cold hospital floor in Seattle, pressing my hand against a cinderblock wall, listening to my father's voice turn to ice before the dial tone buzzed in my ear. Dr. Vance. A hand gently touched my forearm. I flinched, snapping my head to the side. Brenda, my veteran charge nurse, was looking up at me, her brow furrowed with concern. "You okay, Chief? You look like you just saw a ghost." I blinked hard, forcing the sterile air back into my tight lungs. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I pushed the memories deep down into the locked box in my chest where they belonged. "I'm fine, Brenda," I said, my voice instantly returning to its cold clinical baseline. "Prep Bay 3 for massive transfusion protocol. And page Dr. Ramirez right now. I want him scrubbed and standing by in the OR immediately." The wail of the ambulance siren pierced the night, growing louder and louder until it echoed off the concrete walls of the bay. The heavy double doors cracked open, and the stretcher came flying fast. The paramedics were shouting out vitals. Jessica was strapped down tightly to the backboard. She was unconscious, an intubation tube already shoved down her throat, connected to a rhythmic breathing bag. Her shirt was completely soaked in dark arterial blood. Her skin was the color of ash. Her blood pressure was crashing with every shallow heartbeat, and running right behind the paramedics, their faces pale masks of absolute terror, were my parents. Mom was in a fuzzy pink bathrobe, her slippers mismatched on her feet. Dad was wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt, thrown hastily over a white undershirt. They looked older, so much older. My chest tightened painfully as I watched them stumble into the bright ER light. "That's my daughter," Dad shouted past the triage desk, his voice cracking with panic. He was trying to push past a security guard. "Where are they taking her? I need to talk to the doctor in charge. Right now." Denise, an intake nurse I had worked alongside for 4 years, stepped forward, putting her hands up gently but firmly. "Sir, please, you need to wait in the family area. The trauma team is here. The chief of surgery is handling this case personally." "Get me the chief now," Dad demanded, his old authoritative reflex kicking in. He was trying to take control of a situation that was completely out of his hands. Denise glanced through the glass partition separating the waiting area from the trauma bay. She looked right at me. I was fully gowned in blue paper, a surgical mask covering my mouth and nose, my hospital badge hanging prominently from the center of my scrub top. She read the name on my badge. Then she looked back at my frantic father. I saw her eyes widen drastically as the mathematical connection clicked in her head. She opened her mouth about to speak. I gave her a microscopic sharp shake of my head. "Not now." Denise swallowed hard, maintaining her professional composure. "Sir," she said softly, "the chief is prepping for immediate life-saving surgery. Please, step this way." As another nurse gently led my parents away down the long corridor, I heard Dad repeating the same phrase over and over, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "She's all we have. Please, doctor. She's all we have." The words bled right through the heavy glass. They pierced my chest like a scalpel. "She's all we have." As if I had never ever existed. I turned my back to the glass. I looked down at the bloody, broken woman on the stretcher. I stepped into the small, brightly lit scrub room alone. I kicked the foot pedal, and scalding hot water blasted from the faucet. I plunged my hands and forearms under the stream, grabbing a rough bristle brush. I scrubbed my skin until it was bright red, staring up at my distorted reflection in the stainless steel mirror above the sink. I was the daughter they had surgically removed from their family tree. And now, by some twisted joke of the universe, I was the one tasked with saving the woman who had handed them the saw. A dark, heavy part of my mind screamed at me to walk away. "Let her bleed," a tiny, bitter voice whispered. "Let them feel what it's like to lose someone." But the medical oath I took didn't have a special clause for family trauma. My job was to save lives. However, the hospital ethics board had very strict rules. A doctor cannot operate on an immediate family member unless it is a life-or-death emergency, and no other capable surgeon is in the building. The heavy door swung open. Dr. Ramirez, one of my best attending trauma surgeons, rushed in. He was already pulling on his mask. "Ramirez," I said, my voice completely stripped of emotion. It was clinical and sharp. "Stop right there. I have a mandatory conflict of interest disclosure." He paused, his hands hovering over the sink. "Chief, the patient on the table is my sister," I stated clearly, looking him dead in the eyes. Ramirez's eyes went wide above his blue mask. "Dr. Vance, I didn't know. Under hospital ethics guidelines, I cannot be the primary operating surgeon," I continued, dripping wet hands held up away from my body. "You are taking the lead. You hold the scalpel, but because her liver is likely shattered, and I am the foremost hepatic specialist in this entire building, I will scrub in. I will stand directly opposite you as the supervising chief. I will guide every single suture, but you do the cutting. Do you understand?" He swallowed hard and nodded firmly. "Understood, Chief. I have the primary." I walked over to the intercom and told Brenda to document the ethical disclosure in the official hospital chart. I made sure everything was strictly by the book. Unassailable. Perfect. Then I pushed backward through the swinging OR doors. The room was freezing cold and smelled sharply of copper, the unmistakable smell of human blood. I looked down at the operating table. My sister was completely exposed, bruised, broken, and fading fast. The monitors were screaming a frantic, high-pitched warning. For 4 agonizing seconds, she wasn't the monster who ruined my life. She was just a failing human body. "Let's go, Ramirez," I ordered, stepping up to the bright surgical lights. "Open her up." 4 hours and 20 minutes. That is exactly how long we stood on our feet in that freezing room. It was a bloodbath. Her spleen was completely destroyed beyond repair. Ramirez quickly clamped it and removed it. But the liver was the real nightmare. It was a catastrophic grade 4 laceration. Dark blood was pouring into her abdomen faster than the suction tubes could pull it out. I stood inches away from the open wound. My hands were clasped strictly at my chest, not touching a single instrument. I watched Ramirez work. When he hesitated near the deepest, most dangerous blood vessels, sweat beating heavily on his forehead, I didn't yell. I didn't panic. My brain turned into a pure calculating machine. "Angle your needle driver 15 degrees to the left, Ramirez," I instructed, my voice a calm, steady anchor in the chaos. "Clamp that branch of the hepatic artery. Good. Now suture. Layer by painstaking layer. Slower." I didn't speak unless it was about anatomy. The rest of the world vanished. Finally, at exactly 8:40 a.m., Ramirez placed the final closing stitch. The chaotic beeping of the monitors slowly settled into a steady, rhythmic, beautiful thump, thump, thump. Jessica's blood pressure stabilized. She was alive. Ramirez stepped back from the table. He ripped off his bloody gloves and let out a massive breath he had been holding for hours. His scrubs were soaked in sweat. "Flawless guidance, Chief," he whispered, looking at me with deep awe. "Do you want me to go talk to the family?" I reached up and untied my sterile paper gown, letting it drop to the floor. "No," I said quietly. "This one is mine." I walked down the long, quiet hospital corridor toward the surgical waiting room. The hallway had never felt so vast. My sneakers squeaked softly against the linoleum. I was still wearing my surgical scrubs. I pulled my blue paper cap off, letting my hair fall loose. I pulled my face mask down around my neck. My hospital ID badge hung dead center on my chest. The bold black block letters glared under the bright fluorescent lights. Dr. Chloe Vance, MD, FAS, Chief of Trauma Surgery. I pushed slowly through the heavy wooden double doors of the waiting room. My dad stood up instantly. It was a nervous reflex. "Doctor, please, how is she? Is Jessica?" He stopped mid-sentence. His tired bloodshot eyes had dropped to the center of my chest. He read the badge. Then his eyes slowly rose to my face. Then back down to the badge. Then back to my face. I stood perfectly still and watched the recognition hit him like a physical train. It wasn't just surprise. It was total system failure. A violent visible tremor started in his wrinkled hands and traveled quickly up his arms until his jaw began to shake. Mom looked up a half-second later from her plastic chair. Her lips parted to speak, but all the air seemed to instantly vanish from the room. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. Her hand shot out and clamped onto Dad's forearm, her fingers digging into his flannel sleeve with such desperate, terrified force that I knew it would leave dark bruises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds of absolute suffocating, crushing silence. 6 years of missing birthdays, holidays, and phone calls, all compressed into one single explosive moment in a hospital waiting room. I spoke first. My voice was completely calm, using the exact same polite, clinical tone I used for every stranger's family. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Not Mom and Dad. Mr. and Mrs. Vance." I watched those 5 words slice cleanly through their chests. "I am Dr. Vance, the Chief of Surgery," I continued, my face unmoving. "Your daughter Jessica sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 4 liver laceration. I closely supervised Dr. Ramirez on the operation due to strict hospital ethics protocols regarding family members. The surgery was highly successful. She is currently stable in the ICU and will make a full recovery. Behind me, through the waiting room glass, I could see Brenda and another nurse watching. They had finally pieced the drama together. My mother moved first. She stumbled forward, a guttural wet sob breaking violently out of her throat. "Chloe, oh my God, Chloe." She reached her arms out, wanting to pull me into a hug, wanting to instantly erase the last decade. I took one deliberate polite half-step backward. It was an unmistakable boundary. It was a brick wall. She froze instantly, her hands hovering awkwardly in the empty cold space between us. She let out a choked cry, her arms dropping heavily to her sides in agony. Dad's voice sounded like gravel being dragged over broken glass. You're a doctor." "I am," I replied smoothly. "You're the chief of surgery here?" he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "I have been for 3 years." He shook his head wildly back and forth. His brain was malfunctioning, completely unable to process the massive cognitive dissonance between the lies he had believed and the powerful woman standing in front of him. But Jessica showed us the internet posts. She said you married into big money, that you hated us, that you changed your name so we couldn't find you." I didn't blink. I didn't break eye contact. "She told you I dropped out of school," I stated coldly, listing the facts like I was reading a medical chart. "She told you I despised my middle-class roots. She told you I was too embarrassed to ever associate with you again." My voice had no shake, no tears. I had rehearsed this exact moment in my shower 1,000 times over the years, crying until my eyes burned. But I never ever thought it would actually happen while I was standing in bloody surgical scrubs, holding the ultimate high ground. "None of it was true," I said softly, the quietness of my voice making it sound even heavier. "Not a single syllable." Mom was weeping hysterically now, her face buried in her hands. "The letters," she wailed, rocking back and forth. "She said you sent our letters back to us, that you told her to tell us you were dead to us." "I sent you my official university medical leave of absence paperwork," I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. "I mailed it priority from Seattle. You returned it to me unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the envelope, Mrs. Vance. I called this family 12 times. I begged Aunt Martha to reason with you. You threatened to cut her off forever if she even spoke my name." Dad stared down at the cheap linoleum floor as if a massive sinkhole was opening up to swallow him alive. The arrogant, unyielding man who had governed our entire house with absolute, unquestioned authority suddenly had nothing. His pride had been the heavy lock on the door, and Jessica had simply handed him the key. Now confronted with his youngest daughter alive, brilliant, saving his favorite child's life, the entire structure of his reality collapsed into dust. The silence in the waiting room was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. I stood there in my bloody surgical scrubs looking at the two people who had created me. My father, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life, was completely frozen. He kept staring at the floor, his hands were shaking violently. He looked small, he looked entirely broken. Before anyone could say another word, the heavy double doors pushed open behind me. Brenda, my charge nurse, stepped into the room. She was holding a clipboard, completely oblivious to the emotional nuclear bomb that had just exploded between us. "Dr. Vance," Brenda said, her voice bright and professional. "I am so sorry to interrupt. I didn't take my eyes off my parents." "What is it, Brenda?" "The hospital board chair just saw the overnight surgical logs," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "The physician of the year committee wanted me to send their immediate congratulations. Guiding a grade 4 hepatic repair with 0 casualties. They said it was incredible work, Chief." My mother's head snapped up. Her tear-streaked face was completely wrecked. Her lips trembled as she repeated the words, barely making a sound. "Physician of the year." She looked at my tired eyes, my messy hair, and the badge resting on my chest. In that single second, she realized exactly what she had thrown away in exchange for Jessica's pretty lies. She had traded a daughter who saved lives for a daughter who destroyed them. I finally turned my body away from them to look at Brenda. "Thank you. Please put the chart on my desk. I need to go finish my post-op notes." I turned back to my parents one last time. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt incredibly tired. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a hollow, aching, empty space in my chest. "Jessica is in ICU room 8, I said, my voice flat and completely empty. "She is heavily medicated. You can go see her in exactly 1 hour." I turned around and walked out. I kept my spine straight. I measured every single step so I wouldn't stumble. The hallway felt 1,000,000 miles long. Just before the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, I heard my mother collapse heavily into one of the plastic waiting room chairs. A loud, terrible wail echoed through the room. And then I heard my father say the very first honest thing he had said in 12 years. "Thomas," my mother sobbed, her voice cracking in half. "What have we done?" Absolute devastating silence answered her. 5 hours later, I was sitting in my private office, staring blindly at the wall. The sun had finally come up, casting a cold gray morning light over the hospital parking lot. I opened my bottom desk drawer. Tucked safely in the back was the sealed envelope Dr. Evie Cross had given me on my wedding day. I ran my thumb over the thick paper. I had built an entire beautiful life out of the ashes they left me in. I didn't need them to rebuild me. I had done it myself. I stood up, smoothed down my fresh, clean white doctor's coat, and walked down the hall to the intensive care unit. ICU room 8 was dim. The only light came from the glowing screens of the life support monitors. The steady hiss-click of the ventilator filled the room. I walked in and stood at the foot of the bed. Jessica's eyes slowly fluttered open. She looked terrible. Her skin was pale and bruised. She was glassy-eyed from the heavy drip of Dilobead pain medicine flowing into her arm. She stared blankly at the ceiling for a moment, her brain fighting through the drug fog. Then she slowly turned her head. She saw me. She squinted, trying to make sense of the figure standing at the end of her bed. Then her eyes drifted downward. She read the bold black letters on my white coat. I watched the exact second the truth hit her. All the remaining color instantly drained from her bruised face. The heart monitor beside her bed suddenly spiked, the green line jumping in sharp, terrified peaks. Her breathing hitched. "Chloe." Her voice sounded like dry sandpaper rubbing together. "Good morning, Jessica," I said, my voice a quiet, dangerous whisper. "I am the chief of surgery here. Dr. Ramirez was your primary surgeon, but I stood over your open body and supervised your entire operation. I made sure you didn't bleed out on my table. You are going to make a full recovery." She stared at me. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. Even through the heavy narcotics, I could see the dark machinery of her manipulative brain trying to kick into gear. She was desperately searching for a way out, a way to spin this. "Chloe, please listen," she rasped, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "I can explain, it was just a massive misunderstanding. Mom and Dad, I leaned forward. Just 1 inch. But the movement was so sharp she flinched back into her pillows. "You don't need to explain anything to me, Jessica," I said coldly. "I know about the fake HR phone calls to my old residency program. I know about the IP address from your medical device sales office. I know that you have spent the last 12 years hunting me in the dark. I know exactly what you are." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was completely, utterly trapped. I slowly stood up straight and put my hands deeply into the pockets of my white coat. I nodded my head toward the large glass door of the ICU room. "But you don't have to explain it to me," I whispered. Jessica slowly turned her head to look past me. Standing right outside the glass door, looking like 2 hollowed-out ghosts, were our parents. They were staring directly at her. Their faces weren't filled with the blind, protective love she was used to. Their faces were filled with absolute, horrifying realization. "You need to explain it to them," I said. I turned around and walked out of the room. I didn't stay to watch her kingdom burn. I didn't need to. The fire had finally caught, and there was no amount of water that could put it out. I walked away, my sneakers squeaking softly on the tile. As I turned the corner, 2 state troopers in heavy boots walked past me, heading directly toward ICU room 8. They were holding clipboards, there to take an official police statement. Jessica had run a red light at 70 miles per hour. She wasn't just facing our shattered parents. She was facing the cold, hard reality of the law. The protective, imaginary bubble she had lived in her entire life was popping all at once. I didn't stay to watch her kingdom burn, but the ICU nurses heard every single word. When my parents walked into that room, Jessica immediately tried to play her classic role. She started crying, her voice weak and fragile. She tried to tell them she was just protecting them from my cruelty. But my father, stripped of his stubborn pride and completely humiliated, didn't buy it. For the very first time in his life, he didn't just nod and agree with her. He interrogated her. He asked for dates, times, and exact details. And Jessica, backed into a corner with surgical staples holding her abdomen together, finally ran out of scripts. At noon, Aunt Martha arrived. She didn't come to hold hands or offer comfort. She came with a loaded gun. Martha marched past the police officers, walked right into the ICU, pulled out her iPad, and forced my parents to look at the screen. She showed them the 6-year-old cached emails I had sent. She showed them the official PDF of my university medical leave. Finally, she pulled up a text message Jessica had sent her years ago. It read, "Don't tell Mom about Chloe's residency match." She's finally at peace forgetting her. Let sleeping dogs lie. My mother read the screen, turned pale, and vomited into a plastic ICU trash can from the sheer crushing weight of her guilt. My father stood facing the hospital window, his shoulders shaking. The man who had demanded total obedience from his house cried for the first time in his adult life. 3 weeks later, Jessica was discharged from the hospital. I agreed to meet her at a neutral, quiet coffee shop downtown. The sky outside was gray, threatening rain. Lucas sat 2 tables away, casually reading through heavy legal briefs. He didn't say a word, but his presence was an immovable, heavy wall of support. Jessica sat across from me. She looked completely hollowed out. Her family currency was totally bankrupt. She didn't look like the golden child anymore. She just looked tired and small. She finally admitted the core truth. She did it because she realized I was about to outshine her. She simply could not tolerate a world where she wasn't the brightest star in my parents' sky. She had written a beautiful tragic fiction where I was the villain, but a fake story cannot survive when the real subject walks into the room, holding all the facts and pointing out every logical flaw. I am setting strict conditions, I told her, my voice low and completely steady. I didn't touch my coffee. You will draft a written email to all 52 members of our extended family. You will detail exactly what you lied about. You will list how you falsified information, and you will explicitly state that I never ever abandoned this family. Jessica swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward Lucas. Chloe, please. That will humiliate me. Everyone will hate me. If you do not send it by tomorrow morning, I said, leaning in just a fraction, I will have Lucas file a massive defamation lawsuit against you. I will pull the HR records. I will subpoena your office IP address. I will financially and professionally ruin you. Choose. She sent the email the next morning at 8 a.m. The fallout was biblical. Relatives who had spent years gossiping about my arrogance called Aunt Martha, sobbing and begging for my phone number. Nana Betty, our 91-year-old matriarch, called me directly. Her voice shook with absolute fury at the deep betrayal she had been fed. Jessica wasn't formally kicked out of the family, but she became a living ghost. No one ever trusted a single word out of her mouth again. I finally agreed to meet my parents 2 months later. I didn't meet them at their house. I met them in a sterile, rented conference room. I demanded they enter intensive weekly family therapy if they ever wanted to know their future grandchildren. It wasn't a polite request. It was a firm medical mandate. They agreed immediately. Dad had to sit in a therapist's office and dismantle decades of toxic, stubborn pride. Mom had to painfully confront her own cowardice, admitting why she always chose the easy lie over the difficult truth. It has been a year now. Progress isn't a neat wrapped-up movie ending. It is messy. It is awkward. It is my parents standing nervously on my front porch on a snowy Saturday morning. Dad stands there holding a carton of premium orange juice like it is a fragile ancient artifact, quietly asking for permission to enter the beautiful house his youngest daughter bought entirely without him. It is me sitting at my warm kitchen island, watching them drink coffee. Galen the golden retriever rests his head on my dad's knee. I look at my parents and realize the absolute truth. They are just flawed, broken people. They missed the absolute best years of my life because they loved a comfortable, badly written lie more than they loved me. But I am letting them try. On my terms. Behind a heavy door that I alone control. I never sought revenge. I didn't need to scream or break things. I simply built a life so undeniably magnificent, so grounded in truth, that it rendered all their lies completely pathetic. And that, I have learned, is the most devastating response of all. If Chloe's journey through profound betrayal, silent resilience, and ultimate vindication spoke to something deep within you, I invite you to stay a while. Stories like this aren't just told, they are felt, a stark reminder that the truth always surfaces eventually, and that the greatest comeback is simply a life beautifully lived on your own terms. If this level of raw, undeniable storytelling resonates with your spirit, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep sharing these powerful truths together. You belong here.